I'm Debbie Nicole. I am the workshop chairperson for the Kent County Master Gardeners. Today I'm going to present my kitchen herb garden workshop. I've actually done some version of this workshop at least 7 times that I've counted. So we're going to talk about soil for herb gardens. We're going to talk about fertilizers, containers, light, temperature, humidity, propagation. We're going to talk about which kinds of herbs grow well indoors, and we're also going to talk about using herbs in the kitchen. And we are going to cover some recipe ideas and gifts that you can make. Also, I want to let you know that this presentation does contain several video files. So if you don't have a very good internet connection, they may not come in very clearly, but we are recording this, so it's possible that you'll be able to see it recorded. Also, the videos have been loaded to YouTube, and you will receive links to those in your handouts that Megan's going to actually put into the chat box later. So we will be able to download those, and you will have all those links to all the resources and all the handouts. So what is an herb anyway? These are actually the dictionary definitions of herb. You notice in the pronunciation, the H is in parentheses. That's actually because the word herb comes from the French herbe, which also means grass. But it so happens that the United States is the only English-speaking country that pronounces the word herb with a silent H. In England, they pronounce it herb, and in Australia. So that's just a little interesting trivia about that word. So the definition, a couple of different definitions. It's very broad. Any plant with leaves, seeds, or flowers that's used in flavoring food and medicine. Also in botany, it's just any seed-bearing plant. So that's exactly what an herb is by dictionary definition. It's important to know, if you're growing herbs indoors, what type of herbs you have. So here's a brief list of some examples of annuals, biennials, and perennials. Annuals go through their whole life cycle in a single year. They start from seed, they grow, they flower, they produce, they go back to seed, and they die over the winter when it's cold. But the cool thing about annuals, if you're growing them indoors, you can grow them year round, all year round, and never put them outside. So that's a possible thing to do. Biennials, parsley is the one that I'm mostly familiar with. Parsley will come back the second year. It just doesn't taste as good. So technically, I treat it more like an annual. My list said that sage was a biennial. Generally, sage is more of a perennial for me. So there's some overlap in these categories. Perennials. If you're growing perennials indoors, some examples: lavender, which we're going to talk a lot more about later, rosemary, mint, oregano, thyme, chives. I have all of these growing indoors right now. But the best way to treat perennials that you grow indoors is to actually put them outside in the summer and then bring them back in when it gets cool again. Now, some of these perennials, like rosemary, for example, they call them sometimes perennials. If you get a really cold winter here in Delaware, your rosemary may not survive. So you may want to bring it in every winter and put it back out through the summer. Okay, I want to do a little disclaimer at this point. The herbs that we're going to be talking about today, the kitchen garden herbs, are culinary. We're going to talk about the culinary uses of these herbs. These are herbs that you use in cooking and in the smells and those kinds of things. I'm not going to address anything about the issue of medicinal herbs. I'm completely not qualified to talk about medicinal herbs. And this is not anything that you should do without talking about your doctor. talking about with your doctor, because there are herbs that can interact with medications and have different side effects. So I'm not recommending anything for use as a medicinal herb in this presentation. So I just wanted to let you know that. So we're going to talk about culinary herbs today. Examples: basil, rosemary, thyme, tarragon, oregano, dill, cilantro. All of these are cooking herbs. Okay, you've heard of an herb and you've heard of a spice. Have you ever wondered what the difference is? An herb technically is the green leafy parts of the plants. So in your spice section of the grocery store, the herbs could be dried basil, dill, oregano, those types of things. Those are herbs. A spice is actually something that's created from the roots, stems, seeds, fruit, flower, or bark from those plants. So there's actually an herb that we should be familiar with that can be both an herb and a spice, depending on what part of the plant you get that from. And you may have guessed that I'm talking about cilantro, also known as coriander. So the thing about cilantro is it has green leaves, and some people hate it. I happen to like it. It's used a lot in Asian and Mexican cooking. So you can chop up the leaves and use those in your foods. But if you let the cilantro go to seed and you collect the seeds, those seeds can be dried and crumbled up, crunched up in a mortar with a mortar and pestle, and you actually end up with coriander, which is a different kind of seasoning. So coriander is used in, it's a warm spice. It's used in things like curry, rice dishes, and soups. So that's a little bit about a herb versus a spice. Okay, now we're going to start talking about growing your herbs indoors. And the first thing you're going to want to do is choose your container for your herbs. This is a container in the picture here that I actually have in my kitchen. It's a terracotta type container, and each of those little parts have drainage. So it's sitting on a saucer so that when it drains, it can collect the water there. Size considerations, you need to think about what you're planting there and how big it's going to get in the pot. And the length of the roots. Things that have a long taproot won't do well in a small pot. You can always transplant. You can always start in a small pot and transplant them. I don't start my seeds in seed trays or anything like that for my herbs. I start them right into the container. And we'll talk more about growing seeds later. So you want to choose a container made out of something that's porous, because it's important that your plant doesn't stay too wet. If you have a porous material, it gives it more opportunity to dry out. Some examples: terracotta, clay. I actually found some really cool cork ones, so that would be another option you could use. Porcelain depends on whether or not it's glazed. The hint I have for using something that's glass or porcelain, maybe you have a really neat container you like that you want to use and it has drainage. You can add some activated charcoal, and that will help keep that root rot down from too much moisture. So choose your container, choose the size depending on what you're planting in there, and make sure it has drainage. Okay, it's time for our first little video. I'm going to show you how to make this soda bottle planter. This is something we have done in several of the workshops I've done that are in person. So I've actually brought the bottles with me and had the participants create this in class. But obviously we can't do that now, which is really sad. So I'm going to do a video demo on how to do this. If you notice here, the link is for YouTube is here, but you don't have to worry about that right now because you're going to get that in your handout. If you want to interested in making your own or having your kids make one, kids love making these. You can go back and watch the video later, step by step. You also get a handout that has the directions on how to do this. So we're going to go ahead and watch the video. If the video's not coming through clearly, don't worry about it. You need a pretty good internet connection for these to work, unfortunately. You can always watch it later on YouTube. So let's go ahead and start this video.
I'm going to show you how to make a sub-irrigated planter from a 2-liter soda bottle. I know this isn't porous like we've talked about, but I'll be putting some holes in here, and it's a great container to grow your herbs in indoors. So the first thing I'm going to do is put some drainage holes in the top. So I'm going to the next thing I'm going to do is cut this bottle in half. The directions that I'm going to be sending you with your handouts tell you to take a marker and draw a line around there. But I prefer to use painter's tape because I can make a straighter cut. So I'm going to take a strip of painter's tape and put it around the middle of my bottle. And then you can use some really sharp scissors. For me, it's easier to use a knife. So I'm going to take my knife and cut right along the edge of the painter's tape. Then I'm just going to remove the painter's tape, which comes off really easily. And to build my planter, I'm going to take the top part of the bottle and turn it upside down and insert it into the bottom of the bottle. For drainage, I want to have a little bit of space so the top is not touching the bottom of the bottle. For drainage, I have a couple of cotton wicks. These are actually wicks that are used for an oil lamp, but I've cut them into a couple of 4-inch pieces. So these are going to go in the bottom, out the bottom. These are what will take the water and draw it up into the soil. Okay, once my wicks are in place, I'm ready to add my soil. I'm going to moisten it a little bit. And I can see it's already starting to run through and run out the bottom, which is great. That way, if it gets too dry, the water will be absorbed back up into the soil. I had to add a little more dirt. Now it's ready for me to plant. I have some mint that I propagated from cuttings, put it in a little bit of water, and if you can see this, they have some roots. So I'm going to plant these into this planter. Okay, it's finished. Since mint is a perennial herb, I will keep this indoors through the winter, and then in the spring I will take it outdoors and plant it in the garden.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed my little video. Sorry about my editing skills. I'm still learning on how to edit videos, so it's an experiment. So about the potting mix that I used, I'm not recommending any particular brand. Notice I have one here that I happen to use, but there's a lot of different brands out there that are very good. The other thing you can do if you're going with a soilless mix like this is you can actually make your own. If you make your own, you can use the proportions and things that you want. The recommended recipe for making your own that I have seen is half sphagnum peat moss. And sphagnum peat moss is nice because it acts like growing medium, but it's not actual soil. It still has the right color and it drains really well. So that's a great choice. If you mix it with perlite or vermiculite, perlite is actually a expanded volcanic rock substance. So that can be mixed in with the peat moss, and that actually helps with drainage. And the other option is vermiculite, and vermiculite is a clay, a form of a clay. So the clay actually will expand and help hold water and nutrients and air. So in that way, it's better. You should only use, if you're going to use vermiculite, look for a horticultural grade vermiculite product. And just a mention about soil-based. When you transplant a plant from outside, it will have soil. So I do have some plants that are in soil from my garden, actual garden soil. I wouldn't recommend it for planting seeds because it's too heavy. And also when you're planting indoors, remember you're bringing things in from outside, and you could end up with some little insects flying around that were actually living in that soil. So I don't recommend using a soil-based material for your pots, the soil from outside. Okay, now I want to move on to talking about one way of bringing herbs indoor, and that's actually to go out to your garden. It's getting a little bit late in the season for this, but we have had a warm fall, so you might still have some things out there that are lively enough to dig up and transplant. So if you go out to your garden, and this picture here is my mint from my garden, you can go out there and dig up even a part of a plant and divide the roots. You can just pull the roots right apart and they'll be fine. You want to pot them indoors at the same depth as they were outdoors. If you have something that's really leggy, has some long, spindly leaves, you can trim those right off. You can actually trim those off, put those in, trim off the bottom leaves and propagate those and have even more plants, which is what I ended up doing with this mint. This pot of mint grew so much, I cut it off again, and the mint that you saw in the video actually came from this plant. So some herbs that transplant well from your garden, chives. I have some of those that I've transplanted. I'll show you in a minute. Lemon balm will transplant well. Mint, as shown here, and oregano. I've also brought in some of my oregano for the winter. So that's the first way that you can bring herbs indoors. Another way, which is where most of my plants came from, is growing them from seed. So some tips about growing from seed. You can see a list here of things that grow well from seed when started indoors. Basil, parsley, cilantro, thyme, mint, lemon balm, sage, and lavender. As you notice, they're not all perennials or annuals or biennials. There's a mixture here. They all will grow well from seed. Couple of little caveats about these that I want to mention. Cilantro, if you read on cilantro, they say it's difficult to grow indoors. I don't know why they say that, because I personally have not had any problem growing cilantro indoors. I actually harvested some the other day and used it in cooking. Basil, parsley grow like crazy indoors. So easy. Thyme grows really easily. Mint from seed, I haven't actually tried that. I do have lemon mint that I'll show you later. Lemon balm grows like crazy. Lemon balm grows so easily, you can grow it anywhere. My sage grew well from seed. Lavender, we'll talk more about later. It's a little bit more tricky. It's very slow growing. If you try to plant the seeds and you think they're not growing, don't give up on it and throw it out, because it could be weeks before those seeds sprout. So you have to be really patient with that lavender. And we'll talk more about lavender in a minute. Recommendations, again, you should use a soilless potting mix. Plant the seeds like the package directs. Some seeds say they need light to germinate, so you want to put them right on the surface. If it says to plant them 1/2 inch deep, like cilantro, then you plant them 1/2 inch deep, just like you would outside. I tend to overplant too many in the pots, and then you can always thin them out later. If you plant 3 seeds and none of them grow, then you're out of luck. But if you plant 15 seeds and 3 of them grow, then you don't have to worry about it. If you plant 15 seeds and 15 seeds grow, you can pull up some of the extra seedlings if you don't want them. I kind of keep them because I don't like to kill a plant. I know some of us are like that. I hate to kill a plant, but you want to give them enough space to grow. The seeds need moisture, they need heat, and sometimes they need light. Sometimes they need light to grow, to sprout. I grow mine on a heated grow mat, as you can see in the picture. And I also use an artificial grow light to start my seeds. When the seedlings are on there, I water them with a mister, and I'll talk more about that later. You can also cover the tops with plastic wrap to keep the moisture in, or use a little miniature greenhouse, anything that can keep the humidity in there so that the seeds will start. The recommendation is that you should use, if you're going to start in pots, they should be 4 to 6 inch pots, which is what I think I have here. I have some 4 inch and some 6 inch. And if you're starting seeds indoors, and we're always talking about troubleshooting. If you see the leaves starting to turn yellow, it either means they need more light or your soil is not rich enough and you need to fertilize them. So that's one thing you can watch for, is your seedlings starting to turn yellow. And we'll talk more about light here in a minute. Okay, the next thing I'm going to show you is how to propagate from cuttings. You can take cuttings from either plants that are outdoors in your garden. I'm going to tell you that right now is not the best time of year to do this, because what are your perennials in your garden trying to do right now? They're trying to go dormant and sleep for the winter. So if you take cuttings now, if you have some new fresh green sprouts, those probably will work. But if you cut the woody stems at this time of year, they're probably not going to make it, because they just want to go dormant. They just want to go to sleep. So it's better to try this, wait till spring to try to do this kind of propagation, is my recommendation. So some things that you can propagate from cuttings: mint, which I have done, which I showed you in the other video; rosemary, which I've also done, and my rosemary is doing really well. I'll show you that a little bit later; and lavender. In this picture is some lavender I got out of the garden. So this is one I tried to propagate by putting it in water to root. So one method you can do: take your cuttings, strip off the bottom leaves. You don't want any leaves underwater because they'll rot. You want to keep your water clean and keep only the stem underwater. The second method is a soil method. So I'm going to show you a video on how to use a soil method to propagate herb cuttings. And note again that if you can't see this, or you want to watch it again, it's going to be available on my YouTube channel.
I'm going to show you how to propagate herbs from cuttings from your garden. Today I'm going to propagate lavender. I took these cuttings. Lavender will grow from seed indoors, but it's very difficult and very slow to grow, as is rosemary. So I'm going to take this lavender and plant it in this container and grow it inside my house. So the first thing I need to do is start with a good potting mix, a good soilless mix. And lavender likes to have a little bit of lime or calcium. So I'm going to add these crushed eggshells to my potting mix and mix it up. Moisten it a little bit so it's easier to handle. Okay, looking good. And I'm going to add this mix to my pot. As you can see here, I'm using a nice terracotta pot that has drainage. It's very important that your herbs that you grow indoors have good drainage because they don't need too much water. All right, looks like I got just about the right amount. Okay, now I need to prepare these cuttings to be planted. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually remove the lower leaves because all of this part is going to go underground, or under the soil, I should say. Where I've removed the leaves leaves a little bit of wounds in the stem, and that's great because that's where the new roots can grow. I have two separate sprigs here for this pot. Next thing I'm going to do to give them a little bit of a boost is I'm going to brush the stems with a little bit of rooting hormone. I'm going to do this very gently, so I'm actually going to use a little paintbrush to do it. So I'm going to take my paintbrush and dip it in here, and I'm going to gently brush the rooting hormone onto the stems. And it kind of sticks a little bit. To keep the rooting hormone from coming off when I put it in the soil, I'm going to make a hole with my finger and then just stick the root into that, the stem in there. And then I'll cover it with the soil. Okay, looking good. Make sure I get the end where it was cut. Okay, the other thing that cuttings need when you're keeping them indoors in order to get a good start is they need to be kept out of direct sunlight, but they also need a lot of humidity. Don't overwater them, but keep them humid. And a good way to do that is to use a little mini greenhouse type thing. And I made this out of a cardboard box and some plastic out of my recycling. So I can keep this plant covered indoors out of direct sunlight, and it should take root and grow.
Okay, so that was how to propagate. The third method is propagate from cuttings. So you can do that with things you cut out of your garden, or you can cut your plants that you have growing indoors and propagate them. So now we're going to talk about taking care of those plants. Fertilizing. So I actually use this fish fertilizer, or a fish emulsion. I've read that that's recommended, and I'm into natural and organic things. So I use that, but you can use any balanced fertilizer. I have also read that some of the recommendations could be a 5-10-5 fertilizer or a 6-10-4 fertilizer. The only thing you have to remember is you don't want to over fertilize your herbs. They only need to be fertilized at most every 2 weeks. I tend to actually wait longer. If I notice that the leaves are starting to yellow, I may fertilize a little bit sooner than that. So I use a little bit of this fish fertilizer, and I mix it in water and water my plants with that about every 3 weeks to a month, actually, but you can do it every 2 weeks. The reason you don't want to over fertilize your herbs is it'll give them a lot of bushiness and green leaves. But if you're going to use them to cook, it actually reduces the flavor. It weakens the flavor of the herbs. So you don't want to over fertilize them for that reason if you're going to use them in your kitchen for cooking. The watering. So we've said earlier, you don't want to overwater your herbs. So if you put your finger in, just like any house plant, if you put your finger into the soil about an inch and it feels dry down to an inch, then you can go ahead and water that plant. And when I have this, the picture here is my mister. I love my mister because I do two things with it. I use it for my seeds. So when I plant my seeds, you know how potting mix, sometimes if you put water on it, it kind of floats on the top and doesn't sink in. So the mister works really well to keep the seeds that are near the top of the soil moist without washing them away or having that water sitting on the top of the soil. The other thing I use it for is to provide a little extra humidity to some of my cuttings. So I have some rosemary here that I'll show you in a minute, and I actually mist it every once in a while to get it's doing very well, to keep it nice and humid. Some other things about humidity, herbs grown indoors in the winter can get too dried out because the heat in your house will dry out the plants. You can help keep them humid other than misting them. A couple other ideas you can do is keep your plants clustered together. If you have them sitting close together, that kind of environment right there will encourage a more humid atmosphere. Another thing I read about, I haven't tried this, but you can get a tray and put some pebbles on the tray and put some water on the pebbles and then set the plants right on top of those pebbles. So they're not sitting in the water, they're sitting above them. And as that water evaporates, it will provide humidity for your plants. So those are a couple ideas to provide humidity. That's something that's very important for growing herbs indoors in the winter when it's very dry. The herbs also need a lot of sun. So we'll talk more about this, but a sunny south facing window is the best place to keep them. They need a lot more light than they would outdoor in the summer. Outdoors in the summer, they get plenty. Indoors, you have to actually either put them in a really sunny window. Even with that, you may need to provide some artificial light. So I have mine in my kitchen window, as you can see in my background here, but I also have a light above my kitchen sink that I leave on all night to give them that little bit of extra light. And then I have another setup with a artificial grow light where I don't have a window. I leave that on all the time. But to make sure all my plants get some sunlight, I rotate them. So the plants that are in the window will go spend a little time under the grow light, and the plants under the grow light can get some sunshine. So I do rotate those. It's also important if you have it in a window to rotate the container so that it gets sun from all sides and doesn't grow in just one direction. So I want to kind of summarize before we go on how to grow the herbs indoors. So here's the list: chives, thyme, rosemary, basil, parsley, oregano, etc. Those are a list of herbs, many herbs that grow well indoors. Of course, if you want to try another herb, you have nothing to lose by trying another herb that's not on this list. I choose herbs that I use, but you may have different favorite herbs. If you can give them 6 to 8 hours of sunlight per day, that's a little bit tricky in the winter. You have to have a really good window, maybe south and west facing, or you can provide them with 14 to 16 hours of artificial light. You need about twice as much artificial light as you do actual sunlight to give them the right amount of light that they need to grow. Again, I would recommend using a soilless growing medium in your house and use containers that have good drainage because they do not like sitting in water. If they sit in water, they will get root rot and die. That's one of the main reasons that herbs that are grown indoors die, is too much water and root rot. If you can keep it at temperatures below 70 degrees, that's why I like keeping them on the windowsill in the winter, because the cooler air from the window will help keep them a little bit cooler. And keep your air moist. We talked about humidity, ways of providing humidity to those plants, either with a mister or clustering them or putting them on some pebbles with water for that extra humidity. when you water them, after your plants aren't little seeds anymore, and you need to water them, I actually use a little squirt bottle so I can water just directly at the bottom of the plant, at the base of the plant, and not the leaves. Usually, once the water starts, you have your plant with drainage. Once you see the water running out the bottom of that drain hole, then you can stop watering. And again, only water them when it feels dry down to 1 inch. And again, fertilize as needed every 2 weeks or longer. Make sure you don't overfeed, especially if you're using them for cooking, because you'll lose that flavor. And let's see. I want to take a minute to talk about lavender, because lavender is kind of a special case. Lavender is not normally something you would think about growing indoors, but I wanted to include this in this presentation, mostly for the fact that lavender is a nice gift. A lot of people like lavender. If you're going to be giving gifts, this is a great plant to give someone. I never used to grow lavender indoors. I've been growing herbs indoors for about 15 years. But last year was the first year I tried lavender. My daughter actually asked for lavender, a lavender plant for her house for Christmas. And I found it was basically a kit that you could grow lavender indoors. It was buy one, get one half off. So one for her and one for me. Hers didn't make it. I think she just didn't have the patience to allow it the time to root. It took a really long time, but now my lavender plant is growing really well indoors. So the recommendations for growing lavender in containers indoors. The most common variety of lavender that you'll see out there is the English lavender, and that's what it was in my kit, was a form of English lavender. So English lavender is called Lavandula augustifolia. And those are all different kinds of English lavender, and I actually do have some here. I'm going to show it to you in a minute. The other kinds, French lavenders, you can grow those indoors. Choose a smaller variety. Look at how big they're going to grow. The smaller varieties obviously will grow better in containers. The French lavender is very picky about temperature. So you wouldn't want to keep it outdoors all winter, because it's really only for zones 8 and higher. Canary Island lavender is another kind, if you can find it. I haven't been able to find it, but if you can find it, it's one that's known to grow well in containers. And fern leaf. I am growing fern leaf. I'm going to show you this plant in a minute. It's amazing. We were talking about how long it takes the seeds to sprout. My fern leaf seeds sprouted in 2 days. I was amazed, because it took my, I'm also growing Hidcote blue lavender, which is an English lavender from seed indoors, and it took 2-3 weeks for those seeds to sprout. You would think that they were dead and they weren't going to grow, but they eventually will sprout if you just keep taking care of them. So I'm going to show you a comparison between those two in a minute. The fern leaf is really nice. It's pretty. It has a different smell. It doesn't smell like a normal lavender. If we were in an in-person class, I'd be passing these around, letting everybody smell them. But I can't do that. So you're just going to have to take my word for it, or grow your own. So it looks different and it smells different. The strongest smelling lavender is the English lavender. So that's really the most common kind you'll find out there, and what most people have in their gardens, because it's more hardy and it has a better smell. So if you're going to grow lavender indoors, they need a lot of bright light. So the brightest light you can find is the best ones to grow indoors. They need a little bit cooler spot. So if you have a cooler spot in your house, you can put that at a lower temperature. They don't like water. They don't like a lot of water. They are a Mediterranean plant. They are used to a drier, rockier soil. They also like lime. So in the video, you noticed I added crushed egg shells. You can periodically crush up some egg shells and put them on top of the soil to give it a little extra lime. You don't want to have your pots for your lavender too big. The pot should only be 1 to 2 inches larger than the root ball. And lavender is best as a perennial to be put outside for the summer and brought back in the winter if you're gonna keep it indoors. So put it out in the summer, as you should for most perennials. The other thing about lavender is if you're growing it indoors, you may not get it to bloom. It really needs a lot of light to bloom, but it doesn't really matter if it doesn't bloom, because you can still use the leaves for different purposes. And it also, especially English lavender, even the leaves have that lavender smell. And you can use that to make some of the things I'm going to show you how to make later. So I want to take a little bit of a break here for questions and answers about the growing of the lavender before we go on to using the lavender that you've grown. So if you have any questions, you can put those in the chat box, and we will have Megan or Janella ask those questions to me. But first, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I actually want to show you some of my herbs. This is my show and tell time, so I can brag about these herbs I've been growing. So let me get out of this a second. Okay, I hope you guys can all see me now. I want to show you, first of all, let me see. I was telling you about my rosemary. So if you can see this, these are rosemary cuttings that I propagated. When I put them in the soil here, they were about half the size they are now. So they're growing pretty well. So these were propagated from cuttings from my outside garden. These were in the soil outside. So that's rosemary, growing really well. Smells good too. And something I have a ton of is garlic chives. So these are garlic chives that I dug up. These are the ones that I dug up, separated the roots, and put them in a pot. And this is doing really well too. You can also grow these from seeds. If anybody really wants any seeds, I must have like a pound of garlic chive seeds. So send me a message later and I'll see if I can get those to you. I use a lot of chives in cooking. I use them for a substitute for green onions even sometimes. And garlic chives are a little more garlicky flavor than regular chives, but I substitute them freely. This one here, this is one of my biggest plants that I started from seeds. This is lemon balm. I doubt I will cook with this or anything, but I just love the smell. If I rub the leaves, they have a very strong lemon smell. So this one grew really well indoors. I'll probably give this to a friend who likes to make lemon balm tea. This one is a lemon mint, which, as you can see, also grew really well. It probably actually needs to be cut back a little bit. It's really good to cut these back because that actually makes them grow more and bushier when you trim them off and use these leaves. So this lemon mint is not a traditional mint. And this one in particular is not a perennial. Lemon mint is actually an annual, but you can use it in the same ways that you use a lot of mints. This one is very, very, very easy to grow. Very easy to grow. You can actually plant it outside and use it even for a ground cover. I want to show you a couple of my basil plants. These were both grown from seed. You can propagate basil, not right now, because if you're like me, my outdoor basil is done. I grew this from seed. This is just your regular basil. I don't know if you can see, but there's a lot of places I've already snipped and used this basil to cook with. So even though outdoors this gets really big, I keep it small indoors by regularly, I use a lot of basil in cooking, regularly snipping off, and I snip it right above a pair of leaves. So this is my regular old basil. As you can see, I planted all of these seedlings. I planted on September 3rd, just to give you an idea how long they've been growing. So this is how much they've grown on September 3rd, minus what I've cut off. So in comparison, I want to show you my mini basil. So this one is actually called, I wrote down what it's called, forgot. This is, I think it's called Nanette. There's all kinds of things. There's globe basils. There's all kinds of little mini basils. And these are great to grow indoors because they don't really get too big. And you can use it just like basil. You can snip the leaves. I've also snipped and used this one. So it would be bigger if I hadn't been using it to cook with. If I have a recipe that calls for, half a cup of snipped basil leaves, I don't take them all off of one plant. I take them off of different plants so that I keep everything growing. So this is the small one as compared to the big one. And as promised, I want to show you my lavender. So this one is the Hidcote Blue Lavender. It's an English lavender. I planted these seeds also on September 3rd, and that's as big as they've gotten. Very, very slow to grow. I give it as much light as I can, but I also don't want to put it on my heating mat because it doesn't want to get that hot from underneath. I try to keep it in the sun as much as possible. So in comparison, this is my fern leaf lavender that I was telling you about. As you can see, it doesn't look anything like a normal lavender. It has a very strong smell, but the smell is completely different from the lavender smell. This will also bloom. And this one is the one I planted on, this is seed I planted on September 28th. So it's grown that much since September 28th compared to the one that I planted on September 3rd. So this one is awesome. I think it's pretty, even if it never blooms. I still think it's pretty to be used as a house plant. So those are the herbs I wanted to show you. I'm going to go back to my screen and see if there's any questions for me from you guys.
Okay, we do have a question from Ram. Is lemongrass different from lemon balm?
Yes, lemongrass is different. And the cool thing about lemongrass, if you can buy lemongrass in the grocery store, a piece of lemongrass, you can actually take that lemongrass and cut it and stick it in water and it will grow new lemongrass. Fennel will do that also. Celery will do that. There's a lot of herbs and vegetables that you can propagate indoors from something you buy at the grocery and just stick in the water. So lemongrass is different from lemon balm, yes. I think, was it lemon? I think lemon mint, sometimes they get confused between the names too. They sound similar. I was reading something the other day about lemon mint also being a type of bee balm. So I'm not sure about that, but the lemon balm is a leafy plant and it can be used for, I don't know if you can see this, if you see my video, it can be used for teas, but make sure you check with your doctor first because this is one that will have side effects. So I'm basically, like I said, I'll give it to a friend who has, who likes lemon balm tea. That's really the only use I know of it for it other than the smell. It's possible it could be used for cooking, but I'm not sure. I've never used it for cooking. Lemongrass and on the other hand is more of a grass type plant and it's used in a lot of Asian dishes, I believe. So they're not the same thing.
Okay, we have another question from Cindy. Can mint get root bound in a container and die?
I'm sure it could. The ones I'm growing indoor that I brought from the outside are in a pot. They're not growing like they do outside. They grow, outside they're out of control. I would recommend if you think it's getting root bound, if it looks like it's getting root bound, you'll know because that drainage hole on the bottom, you'll see roots start coming out. If you see the roots start coming out, then you need to transplant it into a bigger pot. Did that answer your question?
Okay, we have a question about lavender. Do they like a lot or a little bit of water? And what about the sun?
Lavender in general likes less water because they are a Mediterranean plant. So they're used to growing in rocky, drier soil. They grow in more Mediterranean type atmospheres. I actually went to a wedding in Texas, and it was at a wedding venue. It was called the White Barn. They had a big white barn. They had a whole field of lavender growing outside because it was in Texas, and Texas is much lower humidity. So it'll grow better in drier, rockier conditions, like in the south of France type areas. It does grow here. Like I said, French lavender is hard to grow here because it just doesn't stay warm enough in through the winter. But English lavender should grow pretty well. It's hard sometimes outside if you get a really rainy season, it'll die. It doesn't, you make sure it has drainage and try to put it in a rockier soil. It does need a lot of sunlight. So like I said, I keep mine in the sunniest spots of my window that I can, and I rotate them frequently.
Okay, did you say the fern lavender smells like the regular lavender or has a different smell?
It has a different smell. Like I said, if I so wish you guys could smell these things. I need smell-o-vision or something here, but it doesn't. It has a very strong scent. It doesn't smell like lavender though. It just has a strong herbal type scent, almost a spicy scent.
Okay. Let's see, we have one about mint and rosemary. If you try to root mint or rosemary, do you need to put fertilizer in the water?
I don't do it at the beginning. No, I just put it into the soil. But then when I water them with my fish emulsion every 2 weeks or so, that's when I add the fertilizer. I didn't put any fertilizer in to start with, but I did do, like in the video, I did the rooting hormone, which I bought online, and put that in there to give it just makes them get a good head start on rooting. And make sure that if you're going to root from cuttings, make sure you keep them humid or mist. I could take my mister and I mist that rosemary every day to make sure it's keeping enough humidity on it to get the rooting process going.
I was asking if you're rooting in water.
Oh, if you're rooting in water?
You put fertilizer in the water.
No, I just use plain water, and I keep the water clean. So if the water starts getting a little bit cloudy or dirty, then I dump it out and put fresh water in. But I don't use fertilizer in the water. I don't know if that's something that can be done. It's just not something that I do.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Debbie, you mentioned some grow lights. So can you talk a little bit about what kind of grow lights you use and maybe the difference between different grow lights?
There's a lot to choose from out there. The one I have is an older one. It's just, your regular long fluorescent light bulb on a stand. I can't show it to you because it's out in my kitchen, but it's a stand. It's like a little tea stand, and it has a light across the top. And the light used to have these cords where you could raise it and lower it. So if you were starting seeds, you could lower the light to keep it closer to the seedlings and raise it as the plants grew. But it's so old that broke. So I actually have them on bungee cords. I have my light suspended on bungee cords, and I can use the bungee cords to wrap them up and change the height. There's a lot of different types out there. I know now there's newer versions. I don't know the details about which one to recommend. I can't recommend a certain one, but I know that probably if you're looking to purchase one, probably the description on the article will tell you how much light. And as far as I'd say the brighter, the more lumens you can get, the better for growing herbs.
Okay, and someone asked about hydroponics. Do you grow anything?
Not right now. Way back a million years ago, I grew tomatoes hydroponically, but right now I'm not growing anything hydroponically. But like I said, if you wanted to take things you bought in the grocery store and cut them and grow them in water, that can be done. I have some bulb fennel growing out there in my kitchen right now that I took the base of the fennel and put it that I was going to eat, the bottom of the bulb, the root end, and put it in water, and it's growing new fennel. So if you consider that growing hydroponically, I do that, but I don't grow just my regular herbs hydroponically, no.
Can you grow dill successfully inside?
Dill is one of the ones that they do not recommend growing indoors. I have some in my garden. I haven't grown it indoors, but if you have the space and you have for it to grow, because it can get pretty big, go for it. My main reason for growing dill is for the swallowtail butterflies to eat more than for myself to eat. So I don't grow it indoors. I grow it outdoors and mostly leave it for the butterflies. You can try. I would try anything. There's no reason. It might work for you. It's not recommended, and I haven't tried it.
Okay, that's all the questions we have currently.
Okay, we're going to go on then, and we'll have another question and answer period at the very end of the presentation. So I kind of divided it halfway. We're about the halfway point. Now I'm going to talk about the herbs, what to do with those herbs that you grew indoors. So harvesting the herbs. The picture here is actually a basil that I harvested from outdoors. And this is a basil that I have prepared to dry in my dehydrator. So you can harvest them from indoors. If you get buds, if you're getting buds on your plants, then you want to harvest them when the buds first appear for the best taste in those herbs, if you're going to use them for cooking. My herbs that I've grown indoor haven't gotten to the point where they've created any buds yet, and I still harvest them, and they've been great. So if you're going to cut them, you take your little snippers, and we're going to show some of those snipper tools here in a minute, and you cut it just above where the leaves are. So that way that'll create generate new growth. And it's good to keep them growing indoors because you want to keep using them for all your cooking and other projects. If you're planning on drying these herbs instead of using them fresh, do not take the leaves off of the plant before you dry them. Dry them on the stem. And if you're also going to dry them or prepare them anyway, you want to rinse them in cool running water, never warm water. And take off the excess water. I shake them off, and then I put them on some towels and dry them off a little bit. So that's how you would harvest your herbs. Okay, freezing. There's a couple different methods for freezing your herbs if you would prefer them frozen. Keep in mind that frozen herbs are not going to be nice and crispy the way they were when you harvested them. They are going to get mushy when they are thawed out. So one of the ways that you can do it is you can just put them in a baggie or a freezer wrap or put them in a container, stack them in a container and freeze them. So you can do that, just straightforward freezing. Another method you can do is, first of all, put them on a tray or baking sheet so they're all spread out and they won't stick together. And then you freeze them that way. Then you take them off the baking sheet and then you put them in a container and freeze them that way. That way they're all separately frozen. That's another way. The way that I'm trying right now, and I know people who have done this, is use ice cube trays. So I actually bought this ice cube tray that has a top. So I can put them in there and then close the top and keep them fresher. So I did parsley. I took the parsley, I chopped it up, packed it into my ice cube trays, and then filled them with water. As another option, if you want to try freezing them, you can either use oil instead of water, or part oil and part water, depending on what you're planning on using these for in the future. Or you can use melted butter and put them in there and freeze them that way. I use water because my plan on using my parsley is when I have a recipe for, say, a stew or a soup, I just pop out that ice cube with the parsley in it and throw it right into my stew. The ice melts away and you have the parsley in there. So obviously that's a good way to use it because you don't care if it gets a little bit soft in there. you wouldn't want to freeze it and then use it as a garnish on your meals because it would just be too wilted. There's other methods for doing this too. I read things about rolling them up. You can put them in a bag and then roll the bag up and put rubber bands around it and store them that way to take up less space. So there's a lot of different ways to freezing them, but freezing is a good way to freeze the tender herbs, especially things like parsley and those kinds of things. There's different methods that are best used for different things. So freezing herbs is good for those tender herbs. Okay, the way that I use most of the time is drying herbs, and I've done demo presentations on how to do this before, and I'm going to show you in a minute how to dry them in a dehydrator. So some of the different things you can do. This is some of my lavender in this picture that I harvested that was blooming, and I have these little mesh bags that I've been using to cover up my elderberries in the garden so that the birds didn't eat them. So I put these bags over the little clusters of elderberries. So I repurposed those bags for drying the herbs. You can just hang them upside down to dry. You can cover them with a paper bag to keep them clean, but this method worked well for me. They dried really well because they got a lot of airflow and it kept any dust or insects or anything off of the plants. So that's one way to dry it, just natural drying. The other way that I'm going to show you in a minute is to use a dehydrator. I have a dehydrator. I use it for a lot of things, so it gets well used for herbs and dog treats, and I dry tomatoes and other things in it. So I'll show you my dehydrator in a minute. If you don't have a dehydrator or you don't think you'd use one often enough to go out and make that purchase, you can dry them in the oven. You can turn the oven light on and shut the door, and that will give enough warmth in there to dry them in the oven. If you have a gas oven, you can turn the pilot light on and that'll give them enough heat to dry. If you have an oven that you can set down to a really low setting, I know mine oven doesn't start at this low of a temperature, but if you do happen to have an oven that you can set down between 95 and 110 degrees, you can do that in that oven too. You can also dry them in the microwave, and you put them on a paper towel and in a single layer, and you put another paper towel on top of that, and you microwave them for about 2 to 3 minutes, but you want to check them every so often because depending on the water content in those herbs, you don't want to over crispy them. So you do have to check these every once in a while, but it can be done in a microwave. And after your herbs are dried, you can store those in an airtight container up to 3 months. If you want to know how to tell when your herbs are done drying, because this can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes I've dried things when I think it's way longer than it needed to be dried, but I can feel them. And if the leaves are crispy and you can crunch them and they'll crumble when you squeeze them with your fingers, then they're ready. If they're still have a little bit of moisture in them and they're flexible, then they need to dry longer. So that's an indication of how to tell when they're done. Okay, this is a picture of a couple of dehydrators I own just for comparison. The one on the left is a basic like $40 dehydrator. It has trays inside. It has one temperature setting. It has an on and an off. It doesn't have a timer. It's just very basic. It works, but it will dry your herbs really fast. So you have to keep a good eye on it if you're going to use one of these basic dehydrators. The dehydrator on the right here is the one I use in my kitchen. This one has metal trays, but you can set the temperature and you can also put it on a timer. I love the timer because I get crazy busy doing things and I forget about my herbs and all of a sudden they will be cooked and not just dried. So I'm going to show you a video on how to use the dehydrator. That's our next video.
Today I'm going to show you how to dry fresh herbs in a dehydrator. I've cut some herbs that still have a little bit of buds on them. This is the best time to dry herbs for the best flavor. The first thing I'm going to do is rinse them in cool water, shake off the excess water, and blot dry with some towels. I'm going to place these sprigs of herbs on the dehydrator tray so that they're not overlapping and there's plenty of room for the air to circulate. I'm placing the trays in the dehydrator. And then I'll turn on the dehydrator and set the temperature at a low temperature. 95 degrees is good for herbs. And a time to start for about 1 hour, and then when every 30 minutes or so, I'll check to make sure they're not getting over-dried.
So I do want to mention that it actually took way longer than 1 hour to dry those herbs at 95 degrees. But you never know, because depending on how much water you didn't get dried off, blotted off, and as you see, I kind of did that pretty quickly, so I didn't really get all the water off. So the more water that's in the herbs, the longer it's going to take. You never know. Sometimes you just have to keep checking them. I've dried thyme leaves in my dehydrator before. That goes much faster than drying basil leaves. So it just depends on what herbs you're drying and how much water is in them, how long it's going to take. You just don't want to keep the temperature very high, because instead of drying them, you'll cook them if you get above 110 degrees. Okay, I want to say a little bit about cooking with herbs. You can use your fresh chopped herbs for cooking. We've talked about freezing. You can also use them fresh. If you don't have fresh herbs, but your recipe calls for using herbs and you have dried herbs, you want to use about a fourth as much as it calls for fresh. Because dried herbs, especially basil is one of the herbs that has actually a lot more flavor dried than fresh. So you want to make sure you cut that down, or you'll just be overwhelmed with the herb flavor. And the other thing you can do, as shown in this beautiful picture that I found, you can use herbs to garnish your food and make it look really pretty. Okay, so this picture here shows you some of the tools I use in my kitchen herb garden. I have some snippers, choppers, mortar and pestle, some strippers. So I'm going to show you another video about how to use all these tools, and some of them are really cool. You're going to love these. Now I'm going to demonstrate how to use some handy tools that you might want to have in your kitchen herb garden. The first thing are some herb scissors. These are just simple small scissors that you can use to cut off parts of a plant. For example, this one is a little spindly. This is a lavender. So I'm going to cut it back a little bit. It'll just make it grow more. And I can dry these herbs, or I can propagate them. The next thing I want to show you is what I call my choppers. These are another type of herb scissors that have several blades. And I love these for cutting chives. If you want to chop up your chives, it's very tedious to do it with just a knife. But these will cut several pieces of chives at the same time. I love these. These are my favorite tool to have in the kitchen. And I know you're thinking, what about all those pieces that are getting stuck between the blades? Well, that's what this handy tool is for. This is also a cover for the scissors, but I can also use it to get all those pieces out from between the blades. The next tool I want to show you is called a stripper. This has several holes for different size herbs and also has a blade for chopping. So today I'm going to take this little piece of thyme that I cut. When you have a recipe that says to chop thyme leaves, that's crazy. But this is for actually just removing the leaves from the stem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it through one of these holes, one of the smaller holes since it's got a small stalk, and pull it through to the other side. And it'll remove those leaves easily. And the last tool I want to show you is a mortar and pestle. I have some basil leaves here that I previously dried. Normally I don't chop these up until I'm ready to use them, but I'm going to show you, if you want to store them, how you can use a mortar and pestle to pulverize these leaves and cut them up easily into smaller pieces. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work. And the last important tool is a storage jar. So if you're going to store these herbs, you need a jar that has a good seal. This has a nice rubber seal. And make sure that you label the jar with the contents and the date so that you'll know after 3 or 4 months, then you probably, if you haven't used it by then, you probably need to toss it. So I'm going to store these crushed basil leaves in my little jar. Okay, so that was just an overview of some of the things that I use in my kitchen. I really, really love those choppers. So we're going to go on now and start talking about the bonus part of this workshop, which is some gifts you can make. Normally this time of year, we do, as Master Gardeners, we do workshops where you can come in and make something that you get to take home. But unfortunately, during a pandemic, it's not possible to do that. So what I'm doing is I'm going to just give you several examples. If you want to make gifts for any holiday, even as far away as birthdays, Mother's Day. We're not just thinking the upcoming holidays. These are all kinds of things that you can make from the herbs that you've grown yourself in your house. So it's kind of special that way. So here's just a list of some of the things that I'm going to go over. Potted herbs, pretty self-explanatory there. We'll talk about making infused oil that you can, we're talking about a cooking oil that you would use in the kitchen for maybe dipping bread, that kind of thing. Dried herb blends that you can give as a gift. Homemade tea blends. If you have a friend or family member who likes tea, you can make your own tea at home. Sachets, very cool. Sugar scrub, and we're going to make some soap. So first of all, if you, like I said, my daughter asked for a potted lavender. If you can get your lavender to grow, or any of the other herbs that you want to grow that you can share and give as a gift, put them in a nice pretty pot, put a bow on it, and give it to someone as a gift. Okay, we'll talk a minute about herb infused oils. So I actually did a couple of demonstrations on this in the past. The thing that you have to worry about with things that you're going to eat is safety. So when you use dried herbs in herb infused oils, they're much safer. If you use fresh herbs, the problem with putting the herbs into the oil is fresh herbs do have some water content. They have moisture in them. And when you take those leaves that have the moisture and you put them inside the oil, that's a prime condition for bacteria like botulism to grow. So if you're going to use fresh herbs, you need to put it in the refrigerator after you've made it and use it within just a couple of days to be safe. If you're using dried herbs, you can actually store these at room temperature for a lot longer time. So the method that you use, and I'm going to send you the directions, the link to the directions on this too, is you want to take your oil that you're using, and some of the best oils that you can use are low acid type oils. If you're choosing an oil to do this, look for a label that says it's 0.3% acidity. So you want a low acid. Most extra virgin olive oils will be in this category. You want to look for a harvest date. They're better the fresher the oil is. So if you look at a bottle in the store and you're looking at the olive oils, look for harvest dates within the last 18 to 24 months at most. So those are the oil that you want to use. The herbs that you want to choose that work well for this are the hardy herbs, such as rosemary, which is what I used here, thyme, sage, oregano, or any combination of those. You can mix and match whatever you like to use. So the process is to took a pan of oil and heated it up to 180 degrees. I used a instant read cooking thermometer to check the temperature. When it got to 180 degrees, I had my dried herbs in my jar and I filled it up with the oil. So and then just let it cool. So that's the process for doing that. The drier the herbs, the better, to be safe. And then these can be stored. I've read anywhere from 1 to 3 months, probably depends on the temperature, and that keep them in a cool, dark place if you can, and they should last about 3 months. You can use this for dipping bread, like I said, and you can also give it to somebody as a gift. You can decorate your jar up and share with your friends. So that's one of the options there. Another thing is a dried herb blend. This herb de Provence, I actually received some as a gift one year, and it was awesome. So some of the ingredients in this blend, and it can vary depending on the recipe you use or what you like. I have all of these herbs except for marjoram and savory growing right now. The lavender flowers are optional, and I'll give you a little bit of a history of this spice. This originated in the Provençal region of France because that's where the lavender grows. It wasn't actually originally made with lavender, but what happened in Provence, they had a lot of tourists, and the tourists were coming into the region and looking at all the fields of lavender. So they decided to throw in lavender flowers into the recipe just so the tourists would feel like they were having something that represented that region. This particular herb blend was made famous in the 1970s by Julia Child. She used to use this in cooking. So the mixture here, I don't know if you're interested in this, but the recommended mixture that I had was 3 tablespoons of thyme, 2 tablespoons of savory, 2 tablespoons of oregano, 1 tablespoon of rosemary, 1 tablespoon of marjoram, 2 tablespoons of parsley, and 1 tablespoon of lavender flowers. That's a lot of mix, but you can cut that back if you want. That's just an example, but if it's your blend, you can make it however you want. But that's a nice little thing you can give somebody as a gift if you have a friend who likes to cook. This particular herb is good on turkey, so there you go. It's also used on beef, chicken, lamb, fish, eggplant, zucchini, roasted potatoes, and in tomato sauces. And if you mix it, if you want to use it for a rub for chicken or anything like that, if you're going to grill, you can mix it with some olive oil, and the olive oil actually brings out the flavor of the herbs. Another thing you can do if you're grilling, you can throw a little bit of this onto the hot coals, and it will actually give a little bit of a smoky infusion to your food. So that's some things you can do with the herb de Provence. Okay, homemade tea blends. In order to avoid being medicinal here, I kept it simple. I found this recipe for a simple mint and lavender tea. The mint is pretty common. I've just crushed up my mint leaves and use them in mint tea all the time. The benefit of the lavender, adding the lavender, is that it can help with relaxation and it can help freshen your breath. And it's relaxing, antimicrobial, antiviral, and antioxidant. But again, if you think in any way that you might have some kind of reaction to lavender, I would ask your physician first before you drink this. So you mix a teaspoon of dried mint with a quarter of a teaspoon of dried lavender leaves. You can use any means, like they have the little tea balls you can use, or you can simply give this as a gift by putting it in a decorative jar. But what I did, as you can see in this picture, is I made reusable, I'm really big into reusing things. So I made reusable homemade tea bags. So this directions for this, if you like to sew at all, are going to be in your handouts. But basically you take, I believe it was 5 by 2 3/4, something like that, square of, I used muslin. You can use any kind of cotton. Just sew a little bag with a casing with a string in it, put a button or some kind of decorative thing on the end, and you have homemade tea bags. After you make your tea, and I actually tried this and it worked great. I made myself some tea and it turned out perfect. You can take them, turn them inside out, rinse out the old used tea leaves, throw them in the wash. I threw mine in a little lingerie bag and let them dry and use them over and over again. So I thought those were kind of cute. So I will probably actually, I made a bunch of them, so I'll probably actually give some of those to some of my daughters and my friends for gifts. Another one of my favorite things of herbs, herbal scented sachets. So this brings back the memories of my childhood, and I actually still have the sachets that, I don't know if you grew up with these, that we always put in our drawers to make our things, all of our clothes smell nice. There's another added benefit in that if you use certain herbs in there, it will actually keep away the moths and things that might eat your woolens and your furs, if you have woolens or furs. So you can put these in there with them. So the way you make this is you can make it out of whatever you want. Obviously, you can mix whatever you want, whatever smells good to you. You use the dried herbs and you mix them up, and you add a little essential oil to that, whatever oil you want, and that will bring out those smells of the herbs. You need to age it a little bit, so you want to mix it up really well, put it in an airtight container, and store it for several weeks to age it. So and then once it's thoroughly absorbed, the oils are thoroughly absorbed in the herbs, you can put them in little sachet bags of whatever you want. It can be something similar to the tea bags, and then you can put those in the drawers to help scent your clothes. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is a sugar scrub. My granddaughter loves to make sugar scrub and give it to me. Sugar scrub is an awesome gift. In this one, I am using fresh mint mixed with sugar and the extra virgin coconut oil. So you can just chop up those herbs and mix it all up, put it in a pretty container and give it as a gift. This is something that you would use to exfoliate. It's not recommended to be used on your face because the pieces of sugar are too big and they'll actually cause you some abrasion. So it's not recommended to use it on your face, but it's great actually, especially in the winter, to use on your lips. If your lips get dry and crusty, you can take a little bit of this and rub it on your lips, and it really exfoliates and also moistens the lips. You would want to do that on the lips about once a week to exfoliate them. You can use it on, also it's great to use on your body. Use it after you take a shower, rub it in, it will exfoliate. It removes your dead skin cells, it unclogs your pores, and it stimulates your circulation. Depending on how oily or dry your skin is, if your skin is oilier, you can do this up to 4 times a week. If your skin is really dry, maybe just once a week would be good for that. But you can also make this with your own mint, put it in a pretty jar, and give it as a gift. Okay, I'm going to show you the last demonstration of this workshop, which is how to make a rosemary soap. So I'm also including this recipe in your handout. I used a goat's milk soap base just because I happen to really like goats. So that's what I chose to use. But if you look online, you can find all kinds of different soap bases. Some of the options are organic vegetable oil bases, olive oil bases, shea butter, an African black soap base, aloe vera, and glycerin, which is also known as a clear base. I know somebody recently who used glycerin soap base, a melt and pour soap base to make their soap, and they could that way it was clear and they could decorate it and you could see through it and see the things inside. So those are some options. I particularly used goat's milk soap, which is the white. And the only other ingredients you need are your dried rosemary. Of course, this can also be done with lavender, and I have done it with lavender, and also an essential oil to add a little bit of extra oil and smell to that. So I'm going to go through this with you, but I want to just tell you the basic directions here. You just cut this soap base. Since it's a melt and pour, you don't have to worry about making it from scratch. If you make soap from scratch, you need sodium hydroxide, which is a very strong base. And if you are using that, you need to wear gloves and goggles and not breathe the fumes and all that. So I bypass all that and keep it simple by using a pre-made melt and pour soap base. Short and simple. So you just put them in the double boiler and melt the soap, stir in the rosemary and the oils, put it into your soap molds and let it harden. Once it hardens, you just pop it out of the molds and you can wrap it up or tie bows around it and give it as gifts. So I'm going to let you watch this video.
Hi, now I'm going to show you how to make some herbal soap using a pre-made soap base. This is a goat's milk base that I've cut up ahead of time into smaller pieces so it'll melt more quickly. I also have prepared some of my own rosemary by drying it. And I'm going to use a mortar and pestle to crunch it up into smaller pieces. And I also have some optional essential oil that I can add that's completely optional. I'm going to use eucalyptus just because that's what I like. The other supplies I have are these silicone trays that I can use as molds to mold the soap into a bar shape. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is I have a double boiler here sitting over some water. I'm going to add my soap to the double boiler. And put it over some heat to simmer. I'm not going to make you sit here and watch the soap melt. So we're going to take a break, and during the break, I am going to take my rosemary and work on crunching it up, and we will be right back. Hi, it's been about 15 minutes for the soap base to melt. So I am now ready to turn my fire off and add my other ingredients. If you can see It's all nice and creamy. I'm going to stir in the crushed rosemary. And probably, since this is kind of a strong smell, probably about 5 drops. So. It's a little hot here. Get my hot pad out. All right. So once I get this stirred up, I'll let you see what it looks like. Mixed up really well. And I can certainly smell that eucalyptus. I'm going to pour. Ooh, hot. I'm going to carefully pour this into my molds. And I don't fill them all the way up. This 2 pounds worth of soap makes about close to a dozen bars of soap. All right, I'll finish the rest later. So if you can see, they are nicely in this mold. These will harden in about a day. You can speed up the process if you put them in the refrigerator. When they're completely hardened, all I have to do is pop them right out, push them from behind, and then when they're nice and cured, I can take them and wrap them up and make a pretty little gift.
Okay, well, that was the end of that. I wanted to show you my resources. We'll also be sending you these in a link. I did use a few books. These are some good books that I could recommend if you want to grow anything indoors. A lot of these have more information about growing things like lettuce and microgreens and those kind of things. The lavender book doesn't have that much about growing indoors, but it has more about how to take care of lavender and a lot of information about different varieties of lavender, which I've found is a little bit hard to find that information online. I actually ordered some what I thought was going to be French lavender, and when I got it, I looked it up and it was actually English lavender, but that's okay since it'll grow better outdoors. I went ahead and planted it outdoors. So those are some books that I used as references. And I also have a lot of websites that I looked at, including all the directions for making everything. So all of this, don't worry about it right now. I'm gonna send you this as a PDF. And now we're up to the point where we finished with the presentation and we have some time left here that we can answer some more questions if you're interested in asking some more.
Okay, we have one and it says, do we need to cool the oil before adding the herbs to it?
For making the infused oil?
Yes.
No, you pour the hot oil right over the herbs.
Okay. Okay, does anyone else have any questions?
Wow, that's it? I'm sure some people already left, but that's fine because I know this is a long workshop. I just didn't want, I wanted
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure. I took several soap making classes and I really appreciate what you're saying about making soap without the lye. I think it makes it not only dangerous, but it's more chemistry than you really need, I think. Quick question. I did not know that you could buy pre-made goat milk blocks. Do you have a specific source that you went to for that? Because I think that's a fabulous resource.
I went online. There are a lot of places online. So if you just basically Google, so melt and pour, it's called melt and pour soap base.
Okay.
There's a lot of different places that sell them. You know, of course they sell everything on Amazon, but they're also, I don't remember the name of it the other day. I found one that sold all the different types where you could look at a list of the types that I mentioned like the vegetable oil, the shea butter, the glycerin, and you could choose. And it explained a lot about the different types of soap bases depending on what you want. I like the goat soap. It's like I have this dream of raising milk goats someday. So I'm kind of attached.
Ah, and does that site also give you suggested combinations / recipes for, like you said, I guess you did rosemary, but you also did eucalyptus. Like, you've used both of those with the goat milk?
I just used my choice. You can be creative. I
Okay.
I used lavender essential oil when I did those.
Okay.
And then when I did the rosemary, I didn't have any rosemary essential oils, so I just picked up the essential oils that I had, and I just chose the eucalyptus because, in the winter, if you get a
Yep.
cold or whatever, I like the smell. So that's the reason I
Yep.
chose that. You can use anything you want.
I apologize. I had an interruption in the middle of your soap discussion. And when I had taken my soap classes, we all wanted to use lavender. And the teacher said, well, if you do that, it's going to look like mouse turd in your soap. Did you actually use any herbs in the soap, or did you only use the essential oils of that herb?
I used the actual herbs. So here's one. This is the rosemary one. I don't know if you can see it. That's not wrapped up yet.
Yep.
And the I crushed up the herbs so it's not in really big pieces. It's in small pieces.
Okay.
My daughter told me, she's like, I said, do you want some soap? And she's like, well, I don't know. Does it have pieces in it? Because she said somebody gave her some and she got in the bathtub and then she had to clean the tub because there were pieces of herbs all over her.
Well, that's an excellent point. Yeah. Yeah.
So, there's just depends on what you want. So I crushed them up into smaller pieces, but
Yep.
I think it looks pretty. But if you wanted to leave them out, you could always make it with just essential oils or different
Okay.
things.
Okay.
But
And I'm just curious with COVID-19, or do you feel that we should be adding anything else to these soaps that makes them any more hygienic? Or, I mean, it's obvious that the one you've chosen will be great for hand conditioning. But I was just curious if you've had a sense of antimicrobial concept.
well, lavender is supposed to have some properties like that, and I think maybe rosemary does too. I would have to research what herbs had those properties, and I'm
Okay.
sure there's something out there that would be great for that, but I'm not sure that anything other than strong alcohol will kill this
Right.
COVID thing. So other than that, you could always, hand washing is just soap and water, just gets everything
I
off.
agree. I think in many ways we may go overboard with this, but thank you so much. It was very informative.
You're very welcome.
This
Um,
is Cindy. I have a question. You talked about freezing and, different ways of preserving your fresh herbs.
right,
One thing a friend and I did was make a bunch of herb butters.
right.
We softened the butter
Mhm.
in, and then put it in a bowl and then used fresh herbs to make different, dill butter, chive butter,
Mhm.
butter for fish, butter for beef, that kind of thing. It was a lot of fun. It was before COVID, obviously.
Now, did you freeze those?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that's
Freeze
something.
them in chunks or in ice cube trays.
Right. Yep. You can definitely do that. And that's really good if you're going to use it with butter, like if you're going to use it as a spread or in a recipe that also includes those. When I freeze mine, I just freeze them in water because I'm not sure what I'm going to use them for. And usually I make in the winter, a lot of soups and stews. So
Right.
I can add them that way without worrying about whether or not I'm adding other ingredients at the same time. But you can definitely use the butters. I did read a lot of chefs I know do that kind of thing, and they'll use it in their recipes.
It's really good, like to make a corn butter for the corn on the cob in the summer.
Oh yeah. Yeah, my husband would probably want Old Bay in that one, so.
Debbie, this is Claire.
There.
I have trouble with my basil even in the summer. If I bring it in fresh and I want to keep it a few days, I've tried leaving it out. I've tried putting it in the refrigerator for a few days. I've tried putting it in a crisper for a few days. It always turns black.
Really?
So I haven't tried the freezing method or the drying method, but even with the drying method, I know it's going to turn black. Um, I just don't know how, um, when it turns black, I won't use it. So I'm curious as to how you can use them fresh. I like to use it fresh in a salad.
Right. Um, is there any way you could just pick it right before you're ready to use it? Or
Oh,
so it's
well,
fresh?
that's what I've been doing, but sometimes when I know it's going to rain or
Okay.
have bad weather for a few days, I try to bring in a little extra.
Have you tried putting it in just like a glass of water, like cutting it and putting the cut end in underwater?
Um, I did. The water got real ugly looking.
Oh, really? That fast?
um, within a day or two.
Yeah, I usually dry basil, and if you dry it at a low temperature, it shouldn't turn black. If it's turning black, that means your temperature must be too high and you're actually cooking it. If you dry it, it's like a darker green, but it still turns out green.
Well, I haven't tried drying it yet, but I'm just saying if in the house at
Right.
room temperature it turns black, or if I put it in the refrigerator, it turns black.
Yeah.
Either way,
Right. I know it does. Even if you buy it at the grocery store in those little plastic packages that they sell it in, it doesn't keep very long.
Could I ask a question? I wonder if you use a little bit of like a lemon juice or an orange juice or something, a lime juice, just to keep it almost like a pear or apple?
Yeah, I don't know, but it wouldn't hurt to try, of course.
I was wondering then if there was anything that you could think of that I could keep it fresh for a few days rather than having to pick it immediately.
Not any other ways that I know of other than the ways that we've talked about here. I don't, like I said, I grow a lot of lettuces, and
So do
lettuce
I.
it doesn't keep either. So I mean, we cut it 5 minutes before we're going to eat just to keep it, because it also, when things are fresh, they also maintain more of the vitamins and the nutrients that are in them. The longer they're kept refrigerated or sitting out, they start losing all those vitamins and nutrients really quickly.
I,
So our lettuces, we go snip, 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 and I put them in a salad spinner and put them in a bowl, and we eat them 5 minutes after we've picked them, and it's the best flavor that way.
I've had really good luck with my lettuces keeping as much as 2 weeks in a crisper.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, we just grow little baby lettuces, but I like them. I like them really fresh. So
right. Uh, but I tried putting the basil in with it, and
it turns.
sometimes the basil keeps a little better if I put it in with the lettuces, but it doesn't keep as well. And I thought maybe you had some solution for that.
Are you using the really big basil leaves, or are you using the tiny, smaller basil leaves?
Thai basil.
Oh, Thai basil. Yeah, another kind of basil. That one does have smaller leaves. It turns
Mm,
black. I don't know what else to tell you to try other than what was suggested. You could try the lemon juice. Like you could try putting it in water. It just won't keep very long unless you freeze it or dry it.
okay, thank you.
Sure.
This has been a really good seminar.
Oh, well, thank you. Hey, I worked hard on this. I had to up my game to make those videos big time, but I love learning new things, so that was good for me. Good for my brain to learn something new.
It was excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Great job, Debbie. I did want to say some of the people were asking about handouts, and I did say that they will be emailed out as well as evaluation later on. And they also asked about workshop recording. So maybe if you want to put that link in there, it might take a couple weeks before it's uploaded, but it will eventually be there.
Right. Yep. And that's where it is. If you can see the website here too. If you go to this website at the Delaware State University, that link, there you can see future workshops, of which we don't have any ready yet. There will be more coming out hopefully in December. I'm leaving for Canada in a couple of days, and I'll be quarantined for 14 days up there. So I have nothing to do but work on workshops and paint. So be watching your email for the listings coming out in December for our winter sessions. And I'm not sure if we're going to have 3 or 4 things going on yet. Still trying to get that together and scheduled and planned right now. So once those things are ready, you'll get an email, but you can also at any time go to the website and see what's coming up and available. And of course, if you have any other questions, send us an email, call the helpline. Megan, did you put the link to the evaluation in the chat box?
I did.
Okay, so you have that there. I will also email that to you. The handouts, did you put the handouts in there too, or no?
Yep. Twice.
Okay, so if you can, you can download the handouts from the chat. There should be 3 things there. One on making the soda bottle planter, one on all the links and resources, including the links to the videos that I showed you, which are on YouTube. And then there's another one that just gives kind of an overview of some of the herbs and just some basic information. So those are the 3 handouts. Like I said, I'm sorry I didn't have any of them ready. I was spending all my time making videos and not getting my handouts ready. So I didn't have those ready to send out to you with the Zoom link, but I will definitely send them out to you with the follow-up email that I'll be doing later on this afternoon, probably. My husband's teaching a class from 1 to 4. So I have to give him the office for a while, and then I'll be back on it. Is there anything else?
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
The only thing I wanted to ask is that I was having trouble with my computer, so I had to join by phone.
Okay.
And I was wondering if you could send the handouts and links and all that in a separate email, just because I was not able to access them through your chat.
Yes, I'll send you the follow-up email, which says, thank you for coming to the workshop. Here's the link to the evaluation. And I'll also put as attachments those 3 documents as PDFs. So
Oh,
yeah,
thank you very much. I appreciate that.
That'll be coming out probably later on this afternoon,
Okay, thank you very much.
after I get the final attendance from our attendance takers. So I will send it out to the people who were here.
Is the chat
So the one-
available on
one
the
who was
recording?
just speaking,
Is the chat
the
available
one that
on
was
the
just
recording?
speaking with the iPhone, if you could let us know what your name is. Your name isn't showing up. It just says iPhone.
Yeah, it's Robin Hayes.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. That's why I didn't know how to sign in when the email said to sign in. So I apologize. It's been a little challenging today.
Oh,
Yeah, no worries.
Claire, what were you trying to ask?
Does the chat show up in a recording?
I don't believe so. Megan, does the chat show up?
No, it does not.
And I
Okay.
Not
believe-
in once it's on the web.
Yeah, in the recording, you also just get to look at the presentation without all of the Zoom toolbars and pictures and everything too. So you'll just see the presentation with my narration, and then hopefully, we haven't tried this before, but hopefully you'll see the part where I shared my plants. So they're my babies. I'm kind of proud of them. So I wanted to show off.
Oh, they're beautiful. So if it is possible to send the YouTube links as part of it later, that would be great. Yeah, thank you.
They'll get a document that says kitchen herb gardening resources. And the first thing in that is a list of all the links. So it'll actually be in the document.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much.
So you can save that and look at it anytime.
Okay, also you can save the whole chat that has been there at least before it was, done again. There are 3 dots at the bottom and you can save that chat for all the links and everything else. So you might be able to use it that way.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
You say you can save the chat?
Well, the
Yeah,
box that
on
has
the
group
bottom right
chat, there are 3 little dots, and if you click on that, you will see save. So just save it, And then, of course, afterwards, you have to put it somewhere permanently, wherever you want it. But for the moment, while you are on the screen, it will save it.
Oh,
Yeah, there is right next to the file. There are 3 little dots, and if you click on it, you will see save chat. So just save it for the time being. Once we get off this meeting, then you can just take that chat and you can park it wherever you like. And then, of course, you can go to all those the addresses that she has given for YouTube and whatnot, I guess. Yeah, you can. Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, well, I think that about wraps it up. Unless anybody has any last minute questions, we're gonna sign out and call this thing a done deal.
Great job, Debbie.
Thank you.
Anna.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Awesome. Absolutely awesome.